Hey, what's up, guys? It's Imani, Shakur, Rachel K. Burke on Relationships, Romance, and Propaganda podcast. And today we have the beautiful, sexy with all the tattoos, Vanessa Carlisle, who she has a PhD, and she's a sex worker, and we're talking about kink and BDSM. Vanessa, what is your PhD in?
I love the face you're making trying to get through that bio.
I just want to get it right.
I have a PhD in creative writing, literature, and gender studies.
Interesting.
So I have a kind of parallel track that my work runs. So I'm both a sex worker and a person who writes and researches about sex work.
Okay. Nice. Well, thanks for joining us. We're happy you're here. You're on the sexiest podcast on the planet. You know what I mean? And
says him.
Let me start off by saying that I've been called green and not kinky at all so many times. So I'm going to get my pen and my pad, take some notes, and hopefully after the show I'll be a little less green. I have my podcast Splash right here, some cognac, and I'm ready to go. I'll let you ladies jump it off.
All right. So I just want to, so Imani, Vanessa was referred to me by Jennifer, who we had on the podcast.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I like Jennifer.
Yeah, because she was like, you should definitely have her on. She has a very interesting background.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, so I looked her up and I was like, oh, I have so many questions. So I guess just first and foremost, I'd love to know, as far as like a sex worker, I guess specifically what it is that you do that you want to share and how you got into that.
Right. So sex work, of course, is like an umbrella term, right? It's got all these different jobs underneath it. Some of them more legal, some of them less legal.
Okay.
So I'm going to share with you my personal background, but in general, when people say they're a sex worker, one of the reasons why we say that is because it protects us from saying, I'm an escort or I'm a sugar baby or, right? Because some of the jobs are higher risk.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into stripping in college. I mean, I have this very classic kind of like, it was the late 90s and I needed money and I was nannying and I was trying to keep my grades up and it wasn't working out. And I had a friend who worked in a club and I was like, maybe I could do that. And then it turned out to be one of the best jobs for me, like for my life. I stripped for a long time.
Wow.
When you work in a strip club, you start getting exposed to other forms of sex work because oftentimes there's people in the strip club who are doing other forms of sex work. They're either shooting porn or they're seeing clients on the side or that kind of thing. So, for many years, I was just a stripper and I didn't do other forms of sex work. And then, eventually I had a moment where I was like, why am I not doing the easier things that take less time out of my day? So I migrated and I started doing a lot of different things in the industries, and I've had a lot of different sex work jobs. I've done a lot of in-person work. I've modeled, I've been on camera. Most of what I do is in person, and that's my preference. And now I'm primarily a professional dominatrix or a pro dom.
Okay, because that's what I wanted to talk about, and I believe, that's a legal profession, right? Because it's not really about sex as it is about, usually people just want to be dominated, right?
So pro-domination is a really gray area that has been so far rather protected. And the main reason, I think, is because when professional domination involves sexual penetration, it's usually penetrating a man, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so no one's quite been ready to take that up, the question of whether that's prostitution, if you're penetrating him.
Okay.
Interesting.
People have not quite been ready to have that conversation.
Okay.
And so pro doms, like women pro dom, femdoms, pro doms who are women, it is sort of a protected category, even though sometimes we are having penetrative sex. We're pegging our clients. A lot of us do. A lot of us don't. A lot don't.
Got it.
But, the activities of kink are not always sexual, but a lot of the times they are. And a lot of times your clients are naked And, and so there's sexual stuff happening. So I consider it sex work, and I call it sex work. And for me, it is sex work. It's still creating an erotic environment for money,
Interesting.
Got you. Interesting.
My,
real quick, I looked it up just for our audience, and a dominatrix is a dominating woman, especially one who takes the sadistic role in sadomasochism and sexual activities. That's what it says, just by definition for our audience. And it was interesting for me. I've never looked the word up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So my stepmom's friend actually published a book because she was a dominatrix for like all these like famous politicians and everything. It was a crazy story, but she wouldn't have sex with them. I mean, she'll, demean them, make them wear pantyhose, make them, clean for her, whatever they were into. But so the police started disguising themselves as undercover clients and going and trying to get her to sleep with them. And she was like, I told you I don't do that. I told you I don't do that. And that's kind of how she opens the book. And it turns out it was somebody undercover that was trying to ding her. And she didn't give in. But, the stories are interesting. And I read a book once about a male who was gay, and he was in New York City. And he was a male dominatrix, and same thing. It wasn't really sexual, and it would sometimes be like CEOs of companies that had like wives and children back home that had no idea that they had this other life where they wanted to be dominated, and he would tie them up for 3 days, leave them with a bowl of water on the floor, kick them. It was fascinating. Like what, I guess, having a PhD, studying, gender studies, working in this field, what's your mental philosophy behind why people like to be dominated?
Oh, yeah. So I'd like to make a kind of separation between being dominated and being sadistically dominated, right? Or humiliated or degraded. So for some people, just giving up the power over what they're doing with their body, like either through bondage or entering into a scene where they're being told what to do. For some people, that is a huge turn on, and it's also a huge emotional shift. And they're not actually masochists. They don't want to get beat up, and they don't want to get told that they're stupid. They're not into that, right? And then there's people who really want to be sadistically dominated. They want to have their balls crushed, and they want to be yelled at, and they want to be peed on and told that they're an idiot, right? Like that's real.
Yeah.
And but they're like, but the world of power exchange is huge, and it runs the gamut. And so some people in my practice, I'm not a super sadistic dom, actually. I'm a little bit mischievous, and I'm sort of a mad scientist. Like I like to mess with somebody and kind of see how they respond. But ultimately, I'm not actually that into hard impact play or cutting or any of these other things. Like I get kind of I get kind of like, I don't know, I don't see the point in it for me. It's not for me. So my clients don't tend to be people who want to be deeply humiliated or really like, like hit me so hard I can't deal with it and I'm almost going to pass out, that kind of stuff. Like that's just not my clients.
Okay.
Other doms, that's their clients. And in general, men like to be called doms, just dom. Dominatrix tends to be a word for women. But so I think that one of the things is just that, none of us really knows why the things that turn us on. And when we try to explain it, we get all twisted up, right? Like we can try to explain why something turns us on, but sometimes we wish it didn't, right? Sometimes something turns us on and we wish it didn't. Sometimes something turns us on and we're like, oh yeah, I'm ethically in line with that turn on. Good. But like sometimes not. And the kink world is a world where it's okay to have turn-ons that kind of make no sense or that feel a little bit outside of the values of your regular day-to-day life, right? It's a place where with consent, you can play out things that you really couldn't play out elsewhere. And so it's sort of like, emotionally, I think of it as a place where people can, in safety, kind of experiment, play, do new things, sometimes reach an edge and then back off, right? But the goal is actually for it to be very, very safe and to be a really consensual act. And frankly, a lot of the sexual world still does not understand consent. And the kink world is actually where I learned a lot about how to deeply and consistently work with consent. So, you know, that's kind of a myth. It's kind of a myth busting moment, I guess, about kink.
do you use safe words every time?
So it depends. I have both my professional kink life and then I have personally my own stuff that I like to do. Professionally, I put people in situations where they can communicate using a standard like yellow and red system. So I don't like come up with a special safe word with everyone. I check in with them very consistently. If they start feeling woozy or they want to back out of something or they don't like it that much, they can say yellow. That doesn't break the scene. I just back off and check in. If they say red, we're done. They're out of their bondage. Lights are on. What happened? Let's deal with it. Right. That's actually never happened. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever needed to actually cut a scene like that. With
Yeah. I think I read that, you know, in that book that, you know, one of the theories behind it, and it made sense to me, but, you know, one of the theories behind, you know, more of the darker scenarios was because you have these like powerful, you know, men in power, CEOs, people that are always used to everyone kissing their ass, you know, bowing down to them. Everyone says yes to them all the time. So that was kind of a place where they could go where somebody wasn't saying yes to them, actually was treating them like shit, and they wanted a difference in their lives. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've heard that or if that makes sense to you, but it kind of made sense to me when I heard that.
I've definitely seen clients who needed to balance out in that way, where they were in charge of a lot outside of the dungeon. And so inside of the dungeon, you know, they wanted to be in charge of nothing and just have things happen to them. Right. That's definitely something I've seen, but I've also seen people use kink and sort of, and use submission as a way to come to terms with places where they feel powerless in their life. So I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where somebody feels very powerful in the rest of their life and kink helps them balance out as a submissive. But I've also seen it where people do not feel super powerful in their life, and having someone who's really taking charge with them, who's really like putting them through their paces, has actually allowed them to work through some of the issues that they needed to in order to gain a better sense of self-efficacy. It turns out that submission takes a lot of energy, right? To be a really good submissive, you actually have to be very in touch with yourself. You have to be very aware of your body's responses. You have to know what works for you, what doesn't. You have to communicate well. These are all skills you can use in the rest of your life. And so people who are working through stuff, you know, who want to be bound up and messed with, you know, a lot of times it's hot as hell to have someone want to mess with you, right? And just to like receive it. That's super hot. And that is really helpful for them outside.
Imani, do you know about any of this stuff or no?
I mean, not really. I actually directed a film, you know, years ago with this girl, Menwan DeVoe, and she was like the black version of Heidi Fleiss, and she had a bunch of clients. Some of I won't name, very, very famous, you know, in the fashion industry and in the music industry. You know, come to find out, she'd even been with my business manager, which was really weird. I happened to mention it to him. And no, I happened to mention it to her, and she was like, wait a minute, is his name so-and-so? I'm like, yes, that's my manager. She was like, oh, I did so-and-so. And I was like, what? I was completely shocked. And when I mentioned it to him, he was completely flustered. Like, I filmed with who, what? And we never spoke about it. Because he's married with kids. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this was years ago. So we did the film. It was called April's Fools. Her name was April. And she was a dominatrix, and she had all these clients, and it was crazy. And the film never came out because she was so messy, man. And you know, the film, really good film, and it never came out.
Okay.
And she recently, was it earlier this year before COVID? It could have been earlier this year before COVID. She was killed,
Oh my
actually.
God.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
no.
that's
Yeah, the
horrible.
producer of the film called me and said, "Did you hear that Minwan was murdered in like a hotel the other day?
Oh
Has something to do with
wow.
these two women,
Oh.
and the guy like killed her and went and killed the other girl, and
Oh my
it was some
God.
crap." I never really dove into it, but
Okay.
so to answer your question, that was my only uh inkling or taste of this world, because I
Okay.
had to do a film about a girl
That's
who was,
dark. That's hard.
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
yeah. And I still have all the footage, and we've actually talked about doing a documentary on her life,
Mm-hmm.
but then we'd have to call out these famous people that she's been with, and
Okay.
they're really famous, and I didn't want no
Yeah.
one coming after me like, why did Imani Shakur do this doc about Minwan DeVoe and mention so and so's name, and I don't want to ruin any families or lives, so I think we're just gonna leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
it was interesting, very interesting.
well,
You know?
on that note, I read, Vanessa, on your profile too, that you like to educate people on sex worker issues and how to support the community. So I guess, is there
Mhm.
anything that you want to tell our audience in regards to that?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the number one things that I do is anti-stigma education, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking with people about taboo subjects, stigmatized subjects, and particularly in the sex work world, you know, there's so much stigma still out there, and people still, I think, have often not done the reflection that they need to do for themselves on how they feel about sex work and sex workers, and how they might be perpetuating stigma. Like, oh, I don't have a problem with it, but like, what if someone close to you in your life told you that they'd been doing sex work? How would you
Right.
handle it? Could you
Mm-hmm.
be supportive? Do you have any education at all about what the issues are, right? So
Mm-hmm.
understanding that sex workers are operating in a very, very dangerous environment right now. You know, the U.S. is a criminalized environment. So, you know, everyone is always looking over their shoulder and trying to figure out how to stay safe from cops. And sex workers are often victims of violence. We're victims of violence more often than any other worker. We're the number one victims of violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we're constantly like surviving and taking care of ourselves and building communities, we don't need pity. We need to be protected by the law, and we
Yeah.
need to be able to live our lives in peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that stigma against sex work is functioning like at all levels of society, and that sex workers are also functioning at all levels of society, and being able to start kind of doing your own work on how you feel about it so that you can be a more supportive person. I think that's actually like number one. I'm just like, interrupt it when people start using the word whore. You want to know who gets to use the word whore? Me, because I am one. You don't, right? It's an
Yeah.
in-group word,
Yeah.
okay? And
Right.
a lot of the language works that way. Like, don't call your friend a hoe just because you want to. That's not okay. First of all, like, you know, I don't care about slut, because I think slut has been reclaimed by lots of people, but words that actually refer to sex work, I want those words taken out of regular usage, because people use them against us all the time. They're used as insults. It's like,
Right.
that's one little way that you can do your part, is to just
Yeah.
interrupt it when someone's like, you know, I'm just such a whore for this coffee. It's like, no, you're not. No.
Right.
A pumpkin whore.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Or like, I'm doing something I don't want to do, and so I'm going to call it whoring myself.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
no, actually, like, that's not what sex work is, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So you guys don't like those words being used loosely at all.
Sounds
Right.
like it.
Interesting. Something I would
So-
have never known.
I mean, I can't speak for everyone. There's lots of sex workers out there who don't care, and
Gotcha.
who are going to use, you know what I mean? Like, we're all, we're not a monolith. We're all
Gotcha.
different. But I can say that I think stigma functions in language very deeply, and that when people start examining their language, they do start examining how they feel. So
Right.
that's one way in, I think.
Yeah. So I know you were on the Showtime show Polyamory. And we've talked a lot about it on the show. I sent you the link to, one of the shows where we had the couple on that was polyamorous. I thought they shed a lot of light on it. Jennifer actually talked about it too, because, I asked her, what are the most common issues you have when you counsel couples? And she said, infidelity and polyamory was a big, big discussion usually. So I just wanted to ask you on a personal level, if you're comfortable sharing, because your profile says that you are poly, what made you go that route?
Well, for many years, I just thought there was something wrong with me because I would feel like I was in love with more than one person at once. And,
okay, interesting.
And so I just thought I was like wrong or broken or, like couldn't love right. Because of course, if you're dating a monogamous person and you're in love with two people, that doesn't work out. Like that's not a safe situation for them. So for many years, I didn't even really know that polyamory was an option. It wasn't available to me in my little world.
Yeah. I feel like it's becoming more common nowadays.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because there's more dialogue about it. There's more representations of it. There's more visibility, right? But in like 2001, no. So,
right.
Not at all.
Not at all.
No. So I was like a young person who would either cheat and then feel like an absolute asshole and break myself with shame, or I would love more than one person and just squash one of my loves, right? Or and choose, and that always just felt so violent. Yeah. So I moved in with a couple who were my dear friends at the time, and we fell in love like as a trio, and it happened very organically. It happened very. They were non-monogamous already, so they had an open marriage. So there was space for the possibility there. Yeah. And I started fitting into it in a way that was really, deep. And that was a real turning point for me. Like, oh, this is like an orientation that I've had my whole life. And I can be deeply, deeply attached to one person, but really what's likely to happen over the course of relationship is I do tend to be someone who needs to be expressing myself in ways that involve sexual contact and romantic contact with more than one person. So
got it.
And I wonder, I think sometimes too, when there's a third party involved, sometimes it helps the marriage, or it just, because sometimes you might be getting something from one person that maybe the other person doesn't want to give, or I'm thinking of, did you ever see the movie Vicky Cristina Barcelona? With Penelope Cruz. Okay. And like without Scarlett Johansson, their marriage falls apart. Like they need her as the third person to work. You know what I mean? So I think that can happen sometimes too.
I do too. I think people actually treat each other the worst when they're in isolation. And what poly does often is open up the field of communication so that you don't get to just be a dick and then no one knows about it.
Yeah. It's like accountability.
Right.
There's accountability built in.
Yeah.
Family violence happens when nobody's watching.
True.
And poly people are just like everybody else. They have their problems. They treat each other poorly. But oftentimes you have to process it with more than one person, which means even if you don't have a therapist involved, you still have a sounding board, another person who's like, hey, what's going on here? How can we work this out? And I do find that that's been really helpful for me, knowing that, I don't love big group dynamics, honestly. Like I've also changed a lot in the last decade since that show was aired. And I don't necessarily want to be living in a big poly family the way that I was then. Things have changed for me, but I do know that being isolated is never good. And that poly has allowed me to have a lot more space to communicate.
Interesting.
Cool.
All right. Imani, you got any questions? I feel like I'm
No,
talking the whole time.
I don't mind at all. I'm just listening. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just listening and learning.
I want to shift gears for a second because
Okay.
I read something that you wrote, Vanessa, that I know nothing about, and I thought this was very interesting. But what is a death doula?
Oh,
You wrote you
yeah.
were
So
training
that's a
for it,
kind
and I
of
was like, I don't even know what that is. I know what a doula is.
yeah. So that's kind of a totally different direction I'm taking in my life right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but it's also not. So a death doula is a person who works with a dying person and their family, their loved ones, whoever their frontline circle is,
Hmm.
um, to advocate for the patient's wishes, to help kind of pave the way for a smooth transition. So very similar to a birth doula, right?
Hmm.
Where a birth doula is a person who advocates for the birthing person, right?
Yeah.
And for the health and safety of the birthing person. A death doula advocates for the safety and well-being of the dying person.
Huh.
And we can help people navigate some paperwork. We can help them figure out what their legacy wishes are, what they're hoping for their funeral, what they're hoping for their memorial gathering. We can work with them on grief. We can work with them on, wrapping up their life. There's lots of activities. It's very, very different depending on who you're working with.
Okay.
And I got inspired to it because I had a good friend who died of cancer earlier this year, who
Hmm.
was in her kind of in her last months of life, and I really wanted to support. And I just felt like I don't know shit. Like I need to what? Like I don't know anything about what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I started reading books and I started trying to figure stuff out. My grandmother's also at the end of her life, and I knew that there was going to be like some real shifts in my family. So I just thought, this is like an area of skill that I think I want. And also, all of these years of being a sex worker, 22 years of dealing with sex and bodies, I've seen a lot of things and I feel very calm around what bodies do.
Okay.
Okay.
And not necessarily in like a medical way, because I'm not a medical practitioner, but I do have a very I've touched a lot of bodies and I've been present with a lot of bodies, and
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of people go through a lot of changes, right? And it made sense to me somehow to connect that, like, I care about the sensual well-being, the well-being of the body. And when someone's going to leave their body behind,
Mm.
it really feels like a sacred time to be connected and to be helping to help, like, make that a smooth transition. And so I took a class with a group called Going with Grace that I really love, and I do a kind of consultation support for people now. It's not sex, but it's sex and death. I guess is my life now.
The two
And
things
there's
people don't
something
want to talk
that
about.
Right.
I don't want that. There's actually a lot of parallels. Like people
Yeah.
don't want to talk about death and dying. They don't want to think about it. It freaks them out.
Right.
People don't want to talk about sex and sexuality, or
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do in a way that's like, okay. Like
Yeah.
people have intense experience there.
Hmm.
And I just feel like part of my job in this world, has been to aid in the navigation of intensity, human
Okay.
intensity, whether it's because of sexuality or because of, and now I'm looking at death and dying, but the intensity of human experience is what I'm interested in.
Got it. Okay.
Gotcha.
I wanted to shift gears for a second because I saw that and I was like, I don't know. I have to ask her like what that is and how you would make that choice. It seems like such a jump, but hearing you describe it, I guess it's it is connected in a way. So since you have a degree in gender studies, obviously gender discussion is a big topic right now, right? That I think is becoming more and more popular. And I wanted to ask you, as far as studying gender, what's the most interesting thing that you've learned? Or maybe, something that you would want our listeners to really understand.
Wow, I love that question.
Putting you on the spot.
No, I love that. I love that question. I think I'm just trying to make sure I can get the words together. I think because people tend to experience their own gender so deeply and so fully, and because so many of us were raised in a gender binary where we really think there's only two genders, and we really experience the world that way. When I first broke out of that binary for myself and also with partners, I had a profound shift in understanding, and it came through studying, reading, but also physically in my own body, having the experience of being with a person who was a non-binary person. And I realized that just because you feel it and you feel something about your own gender, you literally cannot extrapolate to anybody else. Like, you can't. You don't know what they feel. You don't know how they feel it. And it really helped me with learning people's pronouns. It really helped me with just backing off of like any kind of question that I might have had about how someone else was doing their gender. Like, I needed to learn a lot. I was raised in a Christian household. Like, I'd been a sex worker as a woman for a very long time, dealing with men, and I had experienced a lot of sexism and a lot of gender binary stuff. And I needed support in a certain way to really break that and to start feeling what I actually am is queer. Oh shit! Like, what I actually am is like, and I had to have a physical experience that changed me in order to do that. So you can study gender all you want, but I actually think you kind of physically have to feel something and remember that what you feel and what you go through with your own gender, you have no idea what's going on in the experience of anyone else.
I know, because I just, I don't know a lot about it. And I just had my first friend that came out as transgender, and he was a man and now he's a woman. And I was like, I have so many questions.
She is a woman.
Yes. But I was like, I have so many questions, like, because she still likes women. So, but she's transitioning to a woman. So she's going to be a lesbian now. Cause I was like, I know when she was a man, she liked women, because we had a lot of discussions about it. So I was like, does that mean she's going to get a sex change or no? Or how does that work? And so I've had to learn so much recently about this. And it's so interesting watching, because this just happened like maybe a month or two ago. And now I'm watching pictures, and now she's a woman. And I'm like,
wow.
It's
with the whole sex change and stuff too?
Not yet. Okay. But, usually they start the transition, they take the hormones, but I can see it.
Got you.
It's like, it actually wasn't that much of a transition. Cause she already had like long hair. And so it's, but I was so fascinated, cause I'm like, I have so many questions and I don't want to like ask the wrong thing. And so, it's something I like to shed light on, cause I think people are still learning about it. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There are a lot of resources out there to self-educate, so I'm so grateful now that that's the case. Yeah. That you can Google yourself into a better place.
Yeah. It took a long time.
Understanding different.
Yeah. All right. We only have a minute and a half left. So I think, got anything else, Imani?
No, I was going to ask Vanessa if she had any last words. This was amazing and interesting. I just basically learned the whole time.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do part 2.
I know.
Let me do a lot of research.
I would love to. And yeah, I'm grateful. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.
Absolutely. Right. You were amazing, guys. That's our show. We had Vanessa Carlisle on. She has a PhD. She's a sex worker. She's a dominatrix. She's amazing, as you guys can see. She's really sexy. I like the tattoos, and she was gracious enough to join our show today. Thanks again, Vanessa and Rachel. It's always nice to see you. Thanks for checking in.
All right, you too.
And it's Relationships, Romance, and Propaganda podcast, where we expose the truth and broadcast the lies every week. And we are the sexiest show on the planet. Thanks for checking in.
He's very humble.
Not humble at all.
Thank you so much. You're great.
And let's do part 2. Seriously.
Okay. All right,
guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.